Dr. Fischell, thanks for joining the podcast today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Absolutely. I work mainly on the contract design and manufacturing side of the business, folks that are involved with the design, but mainly in the manufacturing. So it's always great to get perspective from a practicing interventional cardiologist. So I appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And so some of the medical devices that you're involved with right now are pretty novel. And so I'm pretty excited that you could share some of the just kind of high level platform of, the ablative solutions, Peregrine system for treating hypertension, and the Vantis vascular CrossFast delivery system. And I know that you've referred to hypertension as the silent killer. So if you can talk a little bit about hypertension and some of the current treatments, and then talk about the Peregrine system, renal denervation using alcohol. It seems interesting.
Thank you. So hypertension, as a lot of Americans know, is very prevalent. Nearly approximately a third of all Americans have hypertension. We've recently had a huge study that showed that the target blood pressure should probably be under 130 systolic blood pressure. And so that raises the number of people with hypertension to an even greater prevalence. So it's a big problem. And of course, we have dozens of medications that are available to treat high blood pressure. But despite all the medications, and some of them are reasonably effective, only about 50% of Americans who have high blood pressure are being treated, have been recognized that they have hypertension, are being treated, and are achieving the appropriate blood pressure goals. So we have a huge problem here with controlling blood pressure, as it is a very potent killer. It is one of the number one causes of cardiovascular disease, in particular stroke and heart attack and death. And it is so potent that as little as a 10 millimeter change in your blood pressure can translate to about a 20% increase or decrease in your risk of a heart attack, stroke, or dying over about a 10 or 15-year period. And of course, 20 millimeters is more like 30%. So it's a very potent cause of having cardiovascular disease. And we need to do a better job treating it. As a result, people have come up with this concept of what's called renal denervation. Mm-hmm. What does that mean? That means we go in around the arteries, the blood vessels that supply blood to the kidneys, and the sympathetic nerves that communicate between the brain and the kidney go traveling next to the artery, the renal arteries. So what we've discovered is if you knock out those nerves, the sympathetic nerves, both the ones communicating from the kidney to the brain and the ones sending signals from the brain back to the kidney, if you disrupt that pathway, you can lower blood pressure in the majority of people. Probably 70% of people will have a significant blood pressure lowering if you can disrupt the sympathetic nerves between the kidney and the brain. And so renal denervation has evolved. There is a technique that has been developed by a company called Ardian, now Medtronic, using radio frequency, thermal energy to burn the nerves. There's another company called Recor that uses ultrasound energy to burn the nerves, create heat in the blood vessel to kill the nerves that outside the renal artery. And then we have developed a very novel technique to actually go outside the artery with tiny microscopic needles and then deliver a microdoses of ethanol alcohol, only about 10 drops. And that is a very potent agent to also kill the nerves. And the beauty of doing it with alcohol is it's pretty efficient. It can do it with one infusion. It's relatively painless instead of painful. And it can get very deep around the artery and get all the nerves. This is an animation that sort of shows the concept of the Peregrine system, which comes into the renal artery. You can see we have 3 tubes that get pushed out from the catheter up against the wall of the blood vessel. These are the tubes, the guiding tubes that pushes it, centers it. And then the needles lay in the tubes and get pushed through the wall into the outer area. And then you infuse the alcohol. Those yellow fibers, those are meant to be the sympathetic nerves. And so in a single 60-second infusion, one can ablate the sympathetic nerves and have an effect similar to or possibly better than the radio frequency or the thermal methods for ablating sympathetic nerves. So this is called the Peregrine system. It's been developed by a company I helped to found called Ablative Solutions, and we have completed, our pivotal U.S. FDA trial, and we're working toward, God willing, an FDA approval in the next year or two.
Okay. Wow. Excellent. Yeah. Some of the predicates that you mentioned are based on delivering energy, and this is kind of a different method with alcohol. So I appreciate you sharing that with me and the group.
Yeah. So we're optimistic that this is, in many ways, a simpler, more efficient way to perform denervation. We know this is also significantly less painful, for example, than the thermal approaches. So it has some potential efficiencies and advantages over thermal systems, if and when we can get it approved.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Thanks for sharing that. Let's move on to the Vantis Vascular CrossFit delivery system. And I think I've read, there's more incidence of highly complex, highly calcified vessels, coronary and peripheral, and you potentially can have a solution for a delivery system, maybe for laying a stent, for example. If you can talk a little bit about that platform as well.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. So this is an increasing problem for interventional cardiologists like myself and my colleagues. As we move forward, the population who have severe coronary artery blockage are generally older. Their vessels are more calcified. They have calcium deposits, bone-like, within the vessel. The vessels become twisted or tortuous. And so the ability to deliver a coronary stent to treat the blocked area in a coronary has become increasingly treacherous and difficult and technically demanding. We had about 15 years ago the advent of what is called guide catheter extension. These are basically tubes that sit in the guiding catheter, can be extended past the guiding catheter to bypass maybe the first or second blocked area and allow the stent to sort of get a head start to go down the vessel. But they have their limitations because they have a very, blunt-ended straw-like tip. That tip gets stuck on calcium. It gets stuck on old stent struts. And so it doesn't go down the vessel very well at all. And it can tear the vessel as well, cause what's called a dissection. So we have developed a next generation guide extension advanced delivery system, now called the CrossFast, which incorporates a microcatheter that's embedded into the guiding extension. And the whole thing moves down the vessel sort of like a microcatheter, not like a blunt-ended straw, and allows us to go all the way down a blood vessel. Then you pull the inner catheter out and put your stent in. So it's a tremendously more deliverable means to deliver a tube to bypass all the calcified bends and twists and allow one to deliver stents or other therapeutic tools down the coronary or into a leg artery as well, to allow advanced treatment of very complex coronary disease or peripheral disease.
Notice there's this dual locking technology. If you can shed some light on that, it's very interesting.
Yeah, this is sort of the secret sauce. In order to make this system work, you basically have to lock the inner catheter, which has this little metal ring on it, you can see here. And as you push the inner catheter forward, it engages into this snap ring, this coupler, if you will, made out of nitinol, and the midshaft locking mechanism. And then they push together. So you have this incredible pushing, the inner pushing the outer catheter. That allows you to have what's called pushability, to push it down the vessel. And then if you look at the very tip of the catheter, you can see they lock together outside the body and inside the guiding catheter here. And then the tip of this, if we can catheter. And we have this seamless edge. There we go. So the tip of this is this tiny little microcatheter, and all this is coated with a very slippery coating called a
Hmm.
hydrophilic coating. And so this thing just sort of glides down a vessel. We've now done about 20 cases now that it's FDA cleared. We're now in the commercial launch phase of this product, and there has been a tremendous amount of excitement among the interventional cardiologists who have both tried it or just held it in their hands and said, "Oh my God, I
Yeah,
need this tool to help me with these tough cases." It's really
excellent.
not meant to replace the guide extension. It's really meant when guide extension in its current form either will fail or has failed or is anticipated to fail.
Okay. Yeah, so there's some positive news about this device going forward with 510K clearance, and so you can share some of that updates on this particular device for commercialization
Yeah,
potentially.
so we got 510K clearance about 3 or 4 months ago,
Hmm.
and as you can imagine, it takes a little while to get the commercial production up and running, to have our direct sales team interfacing with various hospital systems. You have to get it through the VAT committees, the approval committees, to be able to get it on the shelf. And so we're working through that. I think we just got approval, for example, in the VA hospital systems already.
Ah,
So
okay.
there's been a lot of enthusiasm. We have a lot of the key opinion leaders at major centers, including the Ascension Health Systems in St. Vincent's and St. Thomas and Seton and Borges, as well as other major systems like the Scripps. Dr. Kirstein's been a big advocate of this technology and others. And as we begin the launch, we'll be getting it into the very high-end key opinion leader centers, and then eventually, hopefully, into all the cardiac cath labs that are doing complex intervention.
Okay, excellent. Yeah, looking forward to following the progress there. Very exciting. All that work that goes in up front, right? It's nice to see products being used and being approved and go into commercialization.
Yeah, it always, people see it, they go, "Oh, that's kind of obvious. Why didn't someone do this before?" Or, you know, um, we've been at it almost 5 years.
Hmm.
And there are always various setbacks. COVID, our manufacturer sort of had troubles getting through processes. We had to switch manufacturers at one point, and revalidate manufacturing
Oh,
and go through the 510K design verification again. So, it seems easy when you're just using the product. It's not easy when you're behind the scenes trying to get this out into the market.
manufacturing is very difficult, right? I mean, I told you how a lot of the folks that watch this are from the contract manufacturing space, and in that, wanted to get you, if you last question, if you can kind of share some insight for the catheter designers, the people that are working on the components, the extrusions, the materials, the nitinol laser cut shafts. Is there any input that you can provide? We talked about the increased incidence of calcification and complexity, kind of going forward when we think of designing devices and components. Any input that you could provide from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we're very fortunate in this country. There are, I don't know how many. I've had the good fortune to interface with 3 or 4 very, very good manufacturing and development teams in Minneapolis, in California. And there are some that want to get into this business or trying. Um, it's great to have cooperation, high-end engineers who are very good with materials. We have all kinds of supply chain. We need people who really can manage supply chain for components.
Mhm.
And of course, things like sterilization these days is complex. Things like hydrophilic coatings, being able to send it out, have it coated, send it back, have it go through sterilization processes, and creating efficient pathways to make the cost of goods low enough that you can actually make a viable business. And it's fair to say things like the CrossFast, as of today, it's a very expensive product to build.
Hmm.
We hope to bring that down with efficiencies in the future, but companies that can really coordinate team efforts, create these pathways, and have these temperature charts where you can really follow along, have critical pathways, have supply chains lined up. work with subcontractors, if
Mhm.
you will, for things like sterilization or coatings or nitinol fabrication of unique pieces like the CrossFast has this very complex coupler piece
Yeah.
made out of nitinol. I mean, if you have complex extrusions, and we need company teams that can really put all those pieces together. And if you can, I mean, we're looking for you.
Okay. Excellent. Thanks for that feedback. Very important. And thanks, Dr. Fischell, for sharing these very novel technical platforms with our audience.
My pleasure. Thank you for the invitation, Steve.
Okay.